Hello, Tom Maguire. I'm just going to do a review on the book The Happiest Man on Earth by Jaku. Now, this has to be one of my favourite books that I've read so far this year. I think I'm on close to 90 at the minute, so that is saying something, to be fair. I've had some really good ones, but this is definitely up there. It's certainly in the top five, I would say. I've seen lots of different reviews on Goodreads and things where some very capable people are kind of writing things like what a wonderful tale and how it's a lovely story and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of take a certain exception to that, really, because I remember when I was younger and Schindler's List came out by Steven Spielberg, the film, and I can remember saying to my mum, "Oh, I want to see Schindler's List. It's like, people say it's such a good film and stuff." And she's like, "Can you really describe something like that as a good film?" It's kind of like, yes, it's a good film, but it's about the Holocaust. It's about kind of some of the most horrific things that have ever happened in the history of mankind. So to call it good or lovely or kind of wonderful, for me, just kind of sits a bit uncomfortably. Lots of people might disagree with me on that, but I'm always honest in my reviews. You will always get honesty from me. I do these reviews for my kids. When they get older, I want them to look back and have a bit of a laugh at me, and I want them to be able to decide what books they want to read and, have an understanding of why I appreciate some of the books that I read. It may not be a personal development book, this one, but it's absolutely crucial for personal development. If you don't take into consideration some of the things that have happened in history, then your personal development needs a bit of a kick up the backside, basically. So this is very relevant to personal development, this book. I have a bit of an issue of kind of describing these books this way, so I'm going to be very careful and quite sensitive when I review this book. It is a fantastic story in some ways. It's a fantastic story of how strong the human spirit is, how strong the human body is, the human mind. So there are lots of positives to be taken from it, but it's an horrendous true story of someone who went through absolute hell and has had some absolutely horrendous things happen. He's had to live the rest of his life without his parents, who died much younger than they should have done, who were taken away from him, many other people who he loved. And although I'm really glad I read it, and I would definitely recommend people to read it, I want my kids to read this sort of stuff when they're a little bit older. I don't want to completely take their childhood away from them too early on. So when they're older and more mature, I'd like them to read this sort of stuff. I think it's really important that people have an understanding of how horrific human beings can be, because I think unless we understand that, we risk slipping back. And we have to kind of, a bit like Jordan Peterson says, we have to kind of understand how capable we are actually of evil, and actually don't assume that you're someone who is perfect and wonderful, because actually if you're put in certain situations, you might well act in a way that isn't particularly great, to say the least. And some of the descriptions of some of the things that happened to him are just absolutely horrendous. And basically none of us, any of us who weren't there, can't really, I don't want to say we can't begin to understand, because I think by using our imaginations, we're able to begin to understand most things, but whether we can fully understand or not, absolutely not. I think, and like he says, unless you were there, you're not going to understand how horrific it was. So it's a really harrowing story, but it does have a really positive message in it, and that's the point. There's a really positive message, and I think that's what these reviewers are talking about when they say it's a lovely story and things. He's a lovely man. He comes across as a lovely man. I've seen him. He does TED Talks as well. He's done a TED Talk, which is fantastic. It's about 12 minutes long. Got about 300,000 views. It deserves more than that. Absolutely lovely guy, real inspiration. And to me, again, like I say, when you talk about personal development, you need people to inspire you. You need people to look at and sort of think, wow, that's the sort of person that I should try to be. And he talks about the importance of being happy in life and choosing happiness, and how actually when he came out of Auschwitz and he managed to survive, and he managed very fortunately to have children and his wife, so he had a family. But he says he looked around him, they never had much money. He always valued work. His dad always instilled a work ethic in him, which is basically one of the things that got him through the concentration camps, because he was useful. He was able to provide a service, which just about managed to get him through, even though he was practically dead by the end. And so the work ethic thing is really important. But he talks about happiness and saying how it's our choice, and how actually he didn't, they grew up not having cars and things when other people had these cars, and they had a tandem bike that they rode around on. But he says about the importance of taking happiness and satisfaction from the little things, being able to have meals on the table after being in a concentration camp where you're literally starving. And it's just really, it's a really important one for perspective, for building a sense of perspective. And I like to have these stories in my mind. I have stories like this, in my mind, such as Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl and others. There are lots of examples from history, lots of stories, lots of books that give us that sense of perspective. The Gulag Archipelago is another one. That's one that Jordan Peterson recommends. And I haven't quite finished that one yet. I'm about halfway through, but again, that's terribly harrowing. But these sort of stories give us a sense of perspective, so that when we are actually finding ourselves complaining about silly, petty things, which I myself do sometimes, you know, you might wake up and the day might not be going quite as well as you want it to. You might not be able to get on with work as well as you want to for different reasons. And you find yourself becoming negative and complaining and whining and whinging. And that's when you need to take a breath and stop and say to yourself, hang on a minute. I'm extremely lucky to even have been born in this part of the world. I'm extremely lucky to have access to a phone, to hot water, to food, to fresh air. And that isn't to undermine the people who have mental health problems, who are struggling, because we all struggle in different ways, and mental health is a very difficult, complicated thing, so I'm not undermining that. But for those of us who don't necessarily have mental health problems, but we might struggle from time to time, it doesn't hurt to have that sense of perspective and to remind yourself of how extremely lucky you are to go outside and be able to have a walk in the fresh air, to look around at nature, to read a book, to listen to music, to eat good food, to drink fresh water out of the tap. We really just need to be mindful and just think about the things that we have and the things that we've got. And that can just make a huge difference to our happiness. So to me, it isn't a wonderful, lovely story. It's a very harrowing, very depressing story. It's real, it's true. And this story needs to be never forgotten. And I will be passing these kind of stories down to my kids, like I say, when they're old enough and mature enough to be able to cope with it and things. And I will be making sure that they remember, that they think about some of the hideous things that have happened in our history. Because young people are the future leaders, aren't they? And they're going to be leading the world and our country, and they have to have compassion and understanding, and they have to have a realistic understanding of how horrible and how evil human beings can potentially be in certain situations. It's a fantastically important book. It's so important, it's crucial. And he's a lovely guy, he's really inspiring. So I urge you, go out and buy it. Either buy the book to read or listen to it on Audible. It's fantastically narrated as well. Watch his TED Talk. It's just a fantastic book. I can't recommend it enough. I'll give this one 5 stars. A fantastic book, The Happiest Man on Earth by Jaku. Hugely inspiring, and I thank him so much for writing it. He's 100 years old now. He wrote it, I think, when he was 99. What a fantastic guy. Cheers.